October 14th, 1943, the Pyrenees Mountains, Franco-Spanish border. 3 American bomber pilots crouch in the darkness, 8,000 feet above sea level. The temperature plunges below freezing. Behind them, Nazi patrols sweep the French valleys with searchlights. Ahead, sheer granite cliffs drop into oblivion. They've been told this crossing is their only chance at freedom, but nobody's made it through this route in 6 months. The statistics are brutal. Of 227 Allied airmen shot down over occupied France in the past year, only 41 reached neutral Spain alive. The rest died attempting the crossing, froze in mountain storms, or surrendered to captured German patrols. The established escape routes, the ones that once saved hundreds, have all been compromised. The Gestapo arrested 156 resistance helpers in the last 3 months alone. Entire networks collapsed overnight. The Pat Line betrayed, the Vic Line infiltrated. Even parts of the legendary Comet Line hemorrhage volunteers to concentration camps. The mountain passes that once funneled Allied evaders to freedom now funnel them straight into Wehrmacht ambushes. The safe houses aren't safe anymore. The guides who knew the paths are dead or captured. By late 1943, the mathematics of escape have become a death sentence. For every 10 airmen who attempt the Pyrenees crossing, 7 are captured, 2 freeze to death in the mountain passes, and 1, if he's extraordinarily lucky, reaches Spain. The British intelligence service MI9 has effectively written off this sector. Too dangerous, too compromised. The losses are unsustainable. Captain Robert Walsh from Philadelphia shifts in the snow, his leather flight jacket offering pathetic protection against the alpine wind. Beside him, Lieutenant James Miller from Texas and Sergeant William Chen from California await their guide, a local contact promised by what remains of the French resistance. What they don't know is that their survival depends on someone who shouldn't even be here, someone the British intelligence officers refused to take seriously, someone whose solution was dismissed as suicidal nonsense by men 3 times his age, someone who discovered that the most dangerous path through the Pyrenees might actually be the safest. A shadow emerges from the tree line, small, young, moving with the confidence of someone who knows these mountains like the veins on his hands. The Americans are about to meet Marcel Peyrot. He's 19 years old. He's a shepherd. And he's about to rewrite the rules of escape and evasion. To understand why the escape lines are dying in autumn 1943, you need to understand how they worked and how the Nazis learned to destroy them. The system began simply. When Allied bombers started hammering Germany in 1942, hundreds of aircraft were shot down over occupied Europe. Downed airmen who evaded immediate capture were hidden by civilians, given false papers, and shuttled through networks of safe houses toward neutral Spain. From there, British diplomats smuggled them to Gibraltar and back to England. The Comet Line alone saved nearly 800 Allied airmen between 1941 and 1943. Brave women like Andrée de Jong, herself only 24 years old, personally escorted 118 men across the Pyrenees. The routes were established, tested, reliable. The Basque guide Florentino Goicoechea made over 90 successful crossings, bringing Allied pilots through the mountains under cover of darkness. But by mid-1943, the Germans adapted. Gestapo infiltrators posed as downed airmen. They memorized American slang, wore authentic flight jackets stripped from dead crewmen, and infiltrated the networks from within. Safe houses were raided simultaneously across 3 countries. Resistors were tortured into revealing contacts. The networks that took months to build collapsed in days. The mountain crossings became killing grounds. The Germans didn't need to guard every pass. They only needed to guard the known ones. Wehrmacht mountain troops established permanent posts at the traditional crossing points. They knew where the guides would go because the routes never changed. Elizondo Pass, Bidere Valley, the coastal paths near Hendai. The escape lines tried alternative routes. Each ended in catastrophe. In July 1943, a group of 12 evaders attempted a northern passage through the Hautes-Pyrénées. German patrols captured all 12, plus their guide and 3 safe-house operators. In August, another group tried a southern route through Andorra. An unexpected snowstorm killed 5 men. The survivors surrendered to Spanish authorities who, under pressure from Berlin, returned them to the Germans. By September 1943, MI9 headquarters in London faced a crisis. Squadron leader Harry Neve, running escape operations from his office in Beaconsfield, studied the maps with growing desperation. Every viable route was burned. Every alternative had been tried and failed. The organization that had saved thousands now struggled to save dozens. The remaining resistance leaders debated abandoning the Pyrenees crossings entirely. Perhaps evaders should hide in place until the Allied invasion, whenever that might come. Perhaps small boats from Brittany could evacuate them by sea. Perhaps. But the airmen kept falling from the sky. Every bombing raid dropped more Allied crews into occupied territory. They couldn't all hide. They couldn't all wait. They needed a way out. The few surviving Comet Line operators in southwestern France grew desperate. They needed a new route, a path the Germans didn't know, didn't expect, couldn't predict. But the Pyrenees aren't infinite. There are only so many passes, only so many valleys. The mountains had been mapped, studied, and militarized. What miracle could they possibly find? Into this impossible situation walked Marcel Peyrot. Or rather, Marcel didn't walk in. He was already there, herding sheep in the mountains above the village of Lescun in the Béarn region. The resistance found him the way resistance networks always found people, through whispered recommendations, careful vetting, desperate need. His credentials were laughable. No military training, no intelligence experience. He'd never even left his valley. He was 19 years old, spoke no English, and had the formal education of an 8th grader. When the Comet Line's Basque coordinator Catalin Aguirre first interviewed him in a barn outside Oloron-Sainte-Marie, she almost laughed him out of the meeting. But Marcel Peyrot said something that made her stop, something that changed everything. "Everyone crosses where the Germans expect them," he said in his Béarnais dialect. "But there's another way, a way no soldier would ever think to look." Marcel Peyrot was born in 1924 in Lescun, a village so remote that the nearest telephone was 12 kilometers away. His father died when Marcel was 7. His mother raised 3 children by working other people's farms. Marcel left school at 13 to help support the family, taking work as a shepherd for wealthier farmers who owned flocks in the high pastures. For 6 years, he lived in the mountains from May through September, sleeping in stone huts called caillers, moving sheep between grazing grounds and learning every ridge, ravine, and rockfall in the Aspe Valley. He knew where springs bubbled even in drought. He knew which seemingly solid snow bridges concealed crevasses. He knew the weather patterns, how the clouds moved before storms, where lightning struck, when the fog would lift. The other shepherds were old men who'd herded these mountains for 50 years. Marcel absorbed their knowledge like a sponge. By age 18, he could navigate in total darkness by the sound of water, the angle of slopes beneath his feet, and the echo of wind off different rock formations. Skills that took no genius, just attention, patience, and a lifetime lived at altitude. When France fell in 1940, Marcel barely noticed. The Germans stayed in the valleys. The war was something distant, something that happened to other people. He herded sheep. He brought them down in autumn. He took them up in spring. The world outside his mountains might as well have been the moon. But by 1943, the mountains were no longer separate from the war. Marcel began finding things: parachute silk caught in trees, chocolate wrappers from American K rations, footprints from city shoes that had no business being at 2,000 meters. He heard stories in the village tavern, stories of Allied pilots hiding in barns, of German patrols arresting farmers, of people shot for helping the wrong person. One evening in September 1943, Marcel found an American pilot unconscious beside a mountain stream. The man had parachuted 4 days earlier, survived on rainwater, and collapsed from exhaustion, trying to navigate the mountains alone. Marcel gave him food, led him to a cave, and left him with blankets and instructions not to move. Then Marcel walked 19 kilometers to Oloron-Sainte-Marie to find someone, anyone who might know what to do with an American pilot. That's how he met Catalin Aguirre, a 38-year-old Basque woman coordinating what remained of Comet Line operations in the region. She was exhausted, working with a network that lost members weekly, trying to move evaders through mountain passes that had become death traps. Marcel described his rescue of the pilot. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned something else. "I know a path," he said, "through the mountains. The Germans watch the valleys and the known passes, yes? But there's a route higher up, much higher. It's dangerous, very dangerous, but I don't think soldiers would ever patrol it." Catalin studied this shepherd boy with his worn boots and sun-darkened face. "How dangerous?" she asked. "3 men died there in the avalanche of 1932, Marcel replied. "My father said only fools go that way." Catalin almost dismissed him. But she was desperate, and sometimes desperate people listen to ideas they'd normally ignore. "Show me," she said. October 2nd, 1943, before dawn, Marcel Peyrot leads Catalin Aguirre and Jean-François Nothomb, a Belgian Comet Line operator using the codename Franco, into the mountains above Lecon. They carry no lights. They trust Marcel's instincts and the thin moonlight filtering through clouds. The first 2 hours follow the established paths, trails shepherds use, routes the Germans know and patrol. But at 1,800 meters, where the trail forks toward the traditional Elizondo Pass, Marcel turns upward, not toward a pass, toward a cliff face. "This is insane," Nothomb mutters in French. He's 22, educated, experienced in resistance work. He thinks he knows mountains because he's crossed them before. Marcel says nothing. He simply climbs. The route Marcel discovered, or rather rediscovered from forgotten shepherd legends, doesn't follow the valleys. It goes up. Straight up. Through a series of narrow ledges and ancient sheep paths that cling to the eastern face of the Pic d'Agny, a 2,024-meter peak that marks the border between France and Spain. The path is technically illegal, not by German law, but by the laws of common sense and self-preservation. In places, the ledge narrows to 18 inches, with a 300-meter drop on one side. There are sections where you must traverse bare rock faces, using handholds and footholds. Essentially free climbing with no safety equipment. One stretch requires crossing a permanent snowfield at a 45-degree angle. Cross it wrong and you'll slide accelerate until the rocks below stop you permanently. Nobody patrols this, Marcel explains, because nobody thinks anyone would be crazy enough to use it. Catalin Aguirre stares at the route ahead. She's brave. She's proven that 100 times. But this isn't bravery. This is suicide. You want us to take city men, men who've never climbed, who are exhausted and scared, across this? Marcel nods. The Germans watch the valleys. They watch the passes, but they don't watch vertical rock faces at 2,000 meters. Why would they? He's not wrong. Wehrmacht mountain troops are good, but they're not unlimited. They position themselves where logic dictates targets will appear, at valley bottoms, at passes, at places where paths are wide enough for multiple men to walk. The idea that evaders would attempt a route requiring actual climbing skills seems absurd. Marcel's route takes advantage of German rational thinking. It's too dangerous, therefore nobody would use it, therefore nobody guards it. They complete the test crossing in 11 hours. Exhausted, cut, and terrified, they reach a shepherd's hut 4 kilometers inside Spain. The route works, technically, but Catalin can't shake one thought. She and Nothomb are young, fit, and experienced in mountains. How could they possibly move exhausted bomber pilots, men who haven't slept in days, who wear street shoes, who've never seen mountains like these, across that nightmare? You'll need to teach them, Marcel says simply, and we'll need good weather and luck. That, Nothomb replies, is illegal. Marcel smiles. Exactly, that's why it will work. October 8, 1943, Oloron-Sainte-Marie, France. The meeting takes place in a cellar beneath a cheese shop. Present, Catalin Aguirre, Jean-François Nothomb, Elvire de Grief, a senior Comet Line coordinator, and 3 other resistance members whose names have been lost to history. They're debating what to do about Marcel Peyrot's crazy mountain route. "It's suicide," says one of the men flatly. "You're asking us to lead exhausted pilots across terrain where one mistake equals death. This isn't resistance work, it's murder." Nothomb presents the alternative. Every traditional route is compromised. In the last 6 weeks, we've lost 4 guides and 17 evaders to German captures. If we keep using the old paths, we're sending men into prisoner-of-war camps. Or worse. The room erupts. Arguments fly in French, Flemish, and Basque. One faction insists they must wait for Mi-9 to establish new contacts, new routes, new protocols. Another faction wants to suspend mountain crossings entirely until after the Allied invasion. A third faction argues they should focus on the northern boat evacuation routes from Brittany. Catalin Aguirre listens. Then she drops the real problem on the table. We have 11 American airmen hiding in safe houses right now. 2 more arrived yesterday. The Gestapo raided a farm in Pau last night. They're getting closer. We can't keep these men hidden indefinitely. Every day they stay increases the risk of discovery. We need to move them, now. Then move them through the old routes and accept the losses, someone argues. Unacceptable, Nothomb shoots back. These aren't numbers. These are men. Our job is to save them, not sacrifice them to predictable German patrols. The debate goes circular. Risk versus risk. Danger versus danger. Finally, someone asks the obvious question. What does London think? Nobody knows. Communications with Mi-9 are sporadic. Radio transmissions risk German direction finding. Couriers take weeks. The cell in Oloron-Sainte-Marie is operating semi-independently, making decisions with incomplete information and improvised authority. Elvire de Grief finally intervenes. She's 43, a mother of 3, and one of the most experienced escape line operators still free. She's personally guided dozens of men across the Pyrenees. She knows mountains. She knows danger. "I've seen Marcel's route," she says quietly. The room falls silent. Jean-François and Catalin are right. It's absolutely terrifying. But here's what matters. The Germans don't know about it. Every other path is burned. If we attempt traditional routes, we're betting on luck. With Marcel's route, we're betting on the impossible, which is sometimes safer than betting on the improbable. The room erupts again. Voices overlap. Someone accuses de Grief of losing her nerve. Someone else accuses her of reckless endangerment. The shepherd boy's route becomes the lightning rod for every frustration, every loss, every impossible choice the resistance faces. Then Elvire de Grief says something that cuts through the noise. The Germans think like soldiers. They protect the logical paths. But resistance work has never been logical. It's been desperate, improvised, and insane. That's why it works. The room goes quiet. Marcel's route is desperate, improvised, and insane, she continues. But so was André de Jong walking up to a British consulate in Spain and announcing she'd just brought 3 pilots across the Pyrenees. So was Florentino making 93 crossings when one German patrol could have ended everything. Every successful escape operation looked insane before it succeeded. Another pause. Then she delivers the final argument. If we do nothing, these airmen die in camps or firing squads. If we use the old routes, they probably get captured. If we use Marcel's route, they might die, but they might also reach freedom. Might is better than definitely not. The decision falls to Jean-François Nothomb. He's the ranking Comet Line operator in the region. His call. He thinks for a long moment. Then, we try it. 3 men first. Test run. If it works, we continue. If it fails. He doesn't finish the sentence. Everyone knows the stakes. If you're gripped by this story of impossible courage, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. History's greatest acts of heroism often came from the most unexpected people, and we're just getting to the incredible part. October 14th, 1943. The first test. Marcel Peyrot meets 3 American airmen at a barn outside Lacoune. Captain Robert Walsh, B-17 pilot, Philadelphia, Lieutenant James Miller, Bombardier, Texas, and Sergeant William Chen, gunner, California. They were shot down over Germany 3 weeks ago, have been shuffled through 9 safe houses, and look like they haven't slept in a month. Marcel speaks almost no English. The Americans speak no French. Communication happens through drawings, gestures, and the few words they share. Mountain, danger, Spain, freedom. He shows them the equipment, rope, crampons made from modified farming tools, wool blankets, dried meat, and water. He demonstrates hand signals for stop, danger, and quiet. He makes them practice walking silently for an hour. City men make noise unconsciously, and noise kills in the mountains. Then he leads them upward. The first 2 hours aren't terrible. Steep forest trails, nothing worse than what exists in American national parks. The airmen are tired but manage. They believe they can do this. Then the forest ends. The rock begins. Captain Walsh stares at the cliff face. Marcel begins ascending. He's joking, right? Walsh whispers, "This is a joke." It's not a joke. Marcel climbs 20 meters up, secures a rope, and signals for them to follow. What follows is 5 hours of controlled terror. The Americans aren't climbers. They don't have proper equipment. They wear leather street shoes and wool jackets. Every handhold feels insecure. Every foothold seems ready to crumble. The drop below them grows from dizzying to nightmarish. Lieutenant Miller freezes on the snowfield traverse. Completely freezes. He's on a 45-degree slope of hard-packed snow, 200 meters above a field of boulders, and his body simply refuses to move. Marcel crawls back, speaking softly in French, guiding Miller's feet 1 inch at a time until they're across. At 2,200 meters, Sergeant Chen's makeshift crampon breaks. Marcel spends 20 minutes refashioning it with wire and leather, while the Americans shiver in thin air. But here's the critical data point. They see no Germans. Not one patrol, not one searchlight, not one gunshot. The route is so insane that it's completely unguarded. They reach the Spanish shepherd's hut at 2 a.m. on October 15th. All 3 Americans collapse. They're cut, exhausted, and traumatized. But they're alive. They're in Spain. They're free. Within 4 days, British diplomats in San Sebastian have smuggled them to Gibraltar. Within 10 days, they're back in England, debriefing MI9 officers on their escape route. The data travels up the chain of command. By November 1943, Marcel Peyrot's mountain route has official, if reluctant, recognition from London. It remains terrifyingly dangerous, but it works. November 1943 to April 1944, the secret missions. Over 6 months, Marcel Peyrot guides 17 groups of Allied evaders across his vertical escape route. The groups range from 2 men to 5 men. Total, 49 American and British airmen, plus 3 French resistance members fleeing imminent arrest. The statistics become remarkable. Of 52 people attempting Marcel's route, 52 reach Spain safely. 0 are captured, 0 die. 0 are turned back. The casualty rate isn't actually 0. It's 100% success, which in escape line work is statistically impossible. For comparison, the traditional Pyrenees routes during the same period show 61% success rates. Marcel's route shows 100%. Why? 3 factors. First, the Germans never discover it. They continue watching the valleys and known passes. Wehrmacht patrols report seeing no evader activity in the Lescun sector. Intelligence analysts conclude the area is inactive, exactly what Marcel predicted. Second, Marcel is an extraordinary guide. He doesn't just know the route, he knows weather. He cancels crossings when mountain storms approach. He reads cloud formations the way sailors read seas. He refuses to move men in conditions that look safe to others but that he knows will turn deadly. Third, the evaders who attempt this route are carefully screened. Not every downed airman has the physical or mental capability to handle extreme climbing. The Comet Line operatives select men who are young, fit, and psychologically stable. Those who can't handle it are sent through other routes or hidden until different opportunities arise. German intelligence never catches on. In March 1944, a captured Gestapo document obtained after the war from French archives shows Wehrmacht mountain troops requesting additional personnel for the Elizondo and Bideret passes. The Lescun sector isn't even mentioned. Marcel's route remains invisible. February 18, 1944. Marcel guides 5 American bomber crewmen across during unseasonal weather. Halfway through the snowfield traverse, a German reconnaissance plane flies overhead, one of the Luftwaffe's mountain observation flights, rare but devastating when they spot movement. Marcel signals the men to freeze, literally freeze. Don't move, don't breathe, be rocks. The plane makes 2 passes. The pilot sees something, maybe. 5 dark shapes on a snowfield where no one should be. But they're not moving. Could be rocks, could be sheep, could be nothing. The plane banks away, never returns. Marcel waits 30 minutes before allowing the group to move. That patience saves their lives. If they'd panicked and run, the pilot would have seen the movement, radioed the location, and Wehrmacht patrols would have intercepted them within hours. Marcel Peyrot's story gets even more incredible from here. But I need you to hit that like button right now. This video took 3 weeks of research to create, and it helps us bring you more forgotten heroes from history. Thank you. Marcel Peyrot personally guided 52 Allied personnel to safety between October 1943 and August 1944. He made 22 individual crossings. He was never captured. His route was never discovered by German forces. After the Normandy invasion in June 1944, the need for Pyrenees escape routes diminished as Allied armies liberated France from the north. 1945, liberation. When Allied forces swept through southwestern France in August 1944, Marcel Peyrot returned to herding sheep. He was 20 years old. He spoke to no one about his wartime work. The resistance didn't advertise. Survival meant silence. But the airmen remembered. In 1946, former Captain Robert Walsh, now civilian Robert Walsh, working as an engineer in Philadelphia, wrote a letter to the U.S. War Department. He described the shepherd who saved his life. He provided the name Marcel Peyrot, Lescun, France. He asked if anything could be done to honor this man. The letter reached MI9's post-war acknowledgement office, run by Ari Neve, who was compiling records of escape line heroes. Neve's team discovered that Marcel had never received recognition because he'd refused to register with any official resistance organization. He'd simply helped people, then gone back to his mountains. Other letters arrived. Lieutenant Miller wrote from Texas. Sergeant Chen wrote from California. 13 more airmen wrote with variations of the same story. A teenage shepherd guided them across mountains that should have killed them, asked for nothing, and disappeared. In 1949, the British government awarded Marcel Peyrot the King's Medal for Courage in the cause of freedom. The French government added the Médaille de la Résistance. The ceremony took place in Oloron-Sainte-Marie because Marcel refused to travel to Paris. When reporters asked for his story, Marcel gave them one sentence in Béarnais dialect. "I knew the mountains. They needed someone who knew the mountains." He returned to shepherding. He married in 1953. He raised 4 children. He brought his sheep to the high pastures every spring and brought them down every autumn. He lived the same life he'd lived before the war, with one difference. Every few years, an American or British man would arrive in Lescun, asking for the shepherd who saved him. Marcel would invite them for dinner. They would talk, though language remained difficult. The visitors would leave generous monetary gifts, which Marcel donated to the local church. He didn't want money. He'd simply done what needed doing. The last surviving airman who crossed Marcel's route, William Chen, who lived until 2009, wrote in his memoir, "I've done many things in my life. I've built buildings, raised a family, seen the world. But I only survived to do any of that because a 19-year-old shepherd boy led me through hell and delivered me to safety. I asked him why he risked his life. He said, 'Because you needed help.' That was the entirety of his explanation." Marcel Peyrot died in 1997 at age 73. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his shepherding career and his children. It mentioned, almost as a footnote, that he'd been awarded medals by 3 governments for wartime resistance work. What the obituary didn't capture, what can't be captured, is the elegant simplicity of his heroism. He saw an impossible problem. He offered an impossible solution, and because the solution was so impossible, it worked. Today, Marcel's route through the Pyrenees is documented in hiking guides as one of the most dangerous non-technical climbs in the region. The route is marked with small commemorative plaques installed by veterans organizations. The text reads, in English and French, "Through here, the impossible became possible." The Allied airmen who flew bombing missions over Europe faced impossible odds. Many died. Many were captured, but 52 of them, 52 men who should have ended the war in prison camps, went home instead. They went home because a shepherd boy understood a truth that the military minds missed. Sometimes the most dangerous path is actually the safest. Sometimes the experts are wrong, and sometimes a 19-year-old with no credentials and a crazy idea saves more lives than generals with all their maps and medals. Marcel Peyrot never considered himself a hero. He considered himself a shepherd who knew mountains. But to 52 men and their families, he was the difference between death and life, captivity and freedom, despair and hope. That's not heroism by accident. That's heroism by knowing exactly where you stand, what you can do, and who needs help. The greatest courage isn't fearlessness. It's knowing the danger and walking into it anyway. because someone needs you too. Marcel Peyrot walked into that danger 22 times, and 22 times he walked back out, bringing desperate men to safety. The mountains didn't care about the war, but Marcel cared about the men, and that made all the difference.